The pen hadn't even left the paper when they started laughing. Not loud. Worse, quiet, shared. The kind of laugh people use when they think someone doesn't belong in the room. She heard it. She kept signing anyway. Across the table, Priscilla Whitmore leaned toward her brother and whispered, 6 months. That's all she gets. Then she's gone. A small smile, a sip of champagne. Like the woman signing her name was already irrelevant. No one corrected her. Not the lawyers. Not the witnesses. Not even the man in the wheelchair at the head of the table, the one she was marrying. Raymond Whitmore, dying, billionaire, and the only person in that room who knew exactly who she was. Because this wasn't a love story. And it wasn't luck. It was a correction. And before the night was over, every single person at that table was going to realize they had just handed the wrong woman a seat inside their empire. The room was a law office on the 44th floor of a building her father had paid to construct. She didn't say that. She hadn't said much of anything in the 2 hours since the Whitmore family arrived with their lawyers, their silked eyes, and their visible disgust. Raymond Whitmore was dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. His family needed the marriage to hold the estate together, some clause buried in the original trust that required a legal spouse for full asset transfer. They needed a wife. They needed her specifically, because her mother's name, was tied to a land agreement that predated every dollar the Whitmores had ever called their own. They just didn't know what that name actually meant. She was introduced to the room as a social worker, Raymond's caretaker, a woman of modest means who had, as his eldest daughter, Priscilla put it to a cousin loud enough to carry, gotten very lucky. She didn't correct her. Raymond caught her eye from his wheelchair. Something passed between them. Not romance, recognition. He gave a small nod. She turned the page and kept signing. Golden Heart Stories, Real Women, Real Power, Stay With Us. Priscilla Whitmore was 43, twice divorced, and currently contesting to sections of her father's trust. She wore the kind of jewelry that announces itself before its owner speaks. She had spent the better part of the morning making sure every person in the room understood the hierarchy: who belonged, who was tolerated, and who was present only by unfortunate legal necessity. The woman signing her father's marriage documents fell into the third category. As far as Priscilla was concerned, she leaned toward her brother Cole and said, just above a whisper, I hope she enjoys the next 6 months. That's probably the most expensive pen she's ever touched. Cole smiled. Their lawyer shifted in his seat but said nothing. Raymond's jaw tightened. Still she kept signing. What Priscilla didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman across the table had been inside this building before, 31 years ago, as a child, sitting on her mother's lap while adults argued in rooms like this one. Her mother had walked out of a negotiation that day, having signed away surface rights to a parcel of land in exchange for a settlement the Whitmore family had quietly celebrated for decades. What they'd never bothered to understand was what her mother had kept. The ceremony was brief. A judge. For witnesses. Raymond's hand was cold but his grip was firm. When it was done, Priscilla asked the photographer not to include the bride in the formal family portrait. She said it directly, out loud, in front of 6 people. There was a pause. Raymond said her name once, low as a warning. Priscilla smiled and said, Daddy, I'm just being practical. The tabloids will have a field day. We need one clean image for the estate announcement. The photographer looked at the floor. She looked at Priscilla, steady, and said, take the photo however you'd like. Then she walked to the window and stood with her back to the room. Cole refilled his drink. Someone coughed. The photographer took the portrait. She watched the city below and said nothing. But her phone, face down on the window ledge, had been recording for 40 minutes. The estate dinner was held 3 days later at the Whitmore property outside the city. 60 guests. Old money mostly. The kind of crowd that communicates status through seating arrangements and the temperature of their greetings. She was seated at the far end of the table. Raymond was at the head, pale and diminished but sharp-eyed. He watched his family move through the room, and something in his expression had shifted since the signing, loosening maybe. Relief. Or guilt. Midway through the second course, a family attorney named Pritchard stood to make an announcement about the estate transition. He outlined the trust structure, the asset timeline, the board appointments. He referred to Raymond's new wife Weiss as the caretaker arrangement, each time drawing quiet laughter from the near end of the table. She set down her fork. Pritchard continued, noting that as a spouse of fewer than 90 days, her inheritance rights would be, of course, significantly limited under the existing terms. Cole raised his glass. Priscilla smiled at her from across the table, generous, victorious. And then she spoke. She said, "Mr. Pritchard, I'd like you to pull the original Whitmore Land Trust. The 1987 version, not the amended one." Silence. Raymond didn't move. Pritchard said, "I'm sorry." She said, "The amendment your firm filed in 1990 was executed against an asset your clients didn't fully own. My mother retained subsurface and developmental rights to the northern parcel. Those rights passed to me. That parcel is currently the site of the Whitmore Group's most profitable data center." Not a sound. She said, "I've known about this for 11 years. I became Raymond's caretaker because he reached out to me. He wanted to make it right before he died. The marriage isn't a convenience. It's a correction." She looked at Priscilla. "The northern parcel alone is valued at $240 million. It was never legally the Whitmore family's to develop." Priscilla's glass was halfway to her mouth. "It stayed there. If you've ever been dismissed in a room where you held all the cards," comment scene. Cole stood up. His chair scraped loud against the floor. He said her name like an accusation and told the room this was a setup. A scheme. That his father had been manipulated by a woman who had inserted herself into their family under false pretenses. Raymond's voice came from the head of the table, quiet, ragged, final. He said, "She inserted herself into nothing. I called her, I brought her here. And everything she just said is documented, verified, and already filed with the court." Cole turned to his father. Raymond said, "I've known what your grandfather did to her family for 20 years. I did nothing. I'm doing something now." The room didn't recover from that. She didn't stay for dessert. She found a chair near the garden doors, away from the noise that had replaced dinner. Pritchard was on his phone. 2 board members had already left. She could hear Priscilla's voice from the hallway, sharp, climbing, losing its composure for the first time all night. Raymond's nurse wheeled him out 20 minutes later. He stopped beside her. He looked exhausted. Lighter. He said, "I'm sorry it took this long." She said, "I know." He said, "Will you stay through the end?" She looked at him. This man, who had called her out of nowhere 14 months ago, who had told her the truth about her mother's land, about the documents, about what his family had quietly built on ground that wasn't theirs. She said, "I already said I would." He nodded. His eyes closed briefly. She looked back out at the garden. Neither of them said anything else. The legal challenge came within the week. Priscilla and Cole filed jointly contesting the marriage, the land claim, and Raymond's mental competency at the time of both. It was aggressive, expensive, and 3 weeks later it was denied. The documentation her mother had filed in 1987 was clean. The rights had never transferred. The Whitmore Group's attorneys settled quietly to avoid a public trial, and the terms included a formal correction to the estate record. Her name was added to the trust, not as a caretaker, not as a convenience, as a rightful heir. Priscilla did not attend Raymond's memorial till months later. Cole came, stood in the back, and left before the reception. She stood at the front and said very little. Raymond had asked her to keep the remarks short. She honored that. Afterward, one of the older board members approached her. He said he had been in that room the night of the dinner. He said he owed her an apology. She said, "Yes, you do." Then she walked to her car, alone, in the quiet of an afternoon that finally felt like it belonged to her. That's the power of knowing your worth before the room does. Subscribe to Golden Heart Stories for more. And if this one stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.